Welcome back. We are still on the Weekly Standard Cruise this week, and I'm delighted to be here with Christopher Caldwell. Christopher Caldwell is the senior editor at the Weekly Standard. Thank you for joining us, and at Ricochet and Whiskey Politics. Chris, some of the things that have been talked about this week that have been absolutely fascinating. I'd like to start off, in September 2015, you said that Trump could win, and the only candidate that could beat Hillary. Obviously, in a vast minority of pundits and writers out there. Discuss how you felt, why you felt that he was going to be the one more than a year before the election.
Well, it's funny. The short reason is that I went out to see him in Dubuque, Iowa. I would say that a month before I wrote that, I thought he was kind of a joke. I mean, I was away for the summer like most people, and I went out and just sat in on an event that he did in the big riverfront convention center, I think it is, or casino or whatever it is, in Dubuque. And the big surprise that I had was I was wondering what I had expected to see an angry room full of people with specific grievances. And what I saw was a room full of people who were having a really good time. And they were not overwhelmingly Republicans. I talked to a lot of Democrats, and there were a lot of people who were just really interested and kind of fed up, but enthusiastic and ready to join something. And I thought he looked like a formidable force. And on top of that, I was struck and surprised, because I'm not a regular watcher of The Apprentice. Okay, I was struck by his sense of humor and his entertaining abilities. So I had a very different opinion about him in September of 2015 than I had in August.
You attest a lot of the anger, if there was anger in the political environment, towards political correctness. I think, if I'm quoting correctly, you called it a grievous problem. That it was an authoritarian governing matter that has the ability to ruin people's lives. Yeah. Is this something fairly new? Has this evolved over decades? Why are we where we are right now with PC?
Well, that's a very long story, and it's an older story than Donald Trump. But I think that basically an important thing to remember about political correctness is that it's not just a cultural problem, it's a political problem. That is, it's not just a matter of, oh gosh, certain things are not fashionable to say anymore. It's that certain things, you can get fired for saying certain things now, or you can be, you can be thoroughly ostracized. You can be blacklisted in a lot of professions for saying, for example, that there's too much immigration in the country, and there are ways to say that, that are sort of distasteful. There are ways to say that are just policy observations. But however you say it, people are uncomfortable expressing the full gamut of what used to be ordinary political opinions. And the thing that was really interesting about Trump is the way he set out in the beginning to break taboos. It's not really clear to me what Trump means by any of this. I mean, I'm not sure to what extent we're to take him literally and to what extent we're to take these pronouncements as gestures. But there's no question that the voting public was impressed by his ability to break taboos, just because he was breaking taboos.
Were people just getting sick and tired of being compared to racist and sexist and homophobes just because they disagreed politically? Was there an anger there for that, or is it a much larger picture with schools?
That's certainly part of it. There is the component of people feeling that they're actually decent people and that they don't deserve the epithets that have been heaped on them. There is partly a policy issue. I mean, people think that that kids ought to learn more about the greatness of the American Constitution. I mean, there are a lot of different elements in political correctness. But I think the key one that helped Trump in this election was that people had looked at politicians and seen that they were defeated by political correctness. And Trump started his campaign as someone who said he was not going to be defeated by political correctness. He might be defeated, okay, but he was not going to knuckle under to political correctness.
Right, right. And that was obviously very attractive to enough people. Right. Let's go back to the election specifically. You mentioned one statement which it caught my ear, and you said that Obama campaigning, I think it was in Detroit or Philadelphia, was the weekend before the election, was like an atomic bomb going off in the summer of 1945.
Oh,
right?
I think I put it a little bit differently.
Regards to polling.
Yes, that's right. No, I think that what I said was that a presidential visit in the closing days of an election is a powerful weapon, and if you only have a couple of closing day visits by the president, and that is the sense in which I meant it was like an atomic bomb in the summer of 1945. We only had 2 of them, and one really needed to know the right thing to do with them. Okay, so Obama had a day or 2 to devote to campaigning in the last days of the campaign, and he spent one of them in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Okay, so you're in a state that ought to be a Democratic lock. You're in a university that is quite liberal and where Obama ought to win comfortably. And that was a sign that the Democrats had polling that was showing that this was a much closer race than they were saying.
And internally, they knew this. They put him in Philadelphia the night before with the big, the celebrities and the musicians and everything else. So, I mean, do you think they knew? They canceled the fireworks that morning of the election day? And
I think they had pretty good polling.
Really?
I think they knew what was going on.
So is polling still reliable then? Because everybody's heads exploded after this election saying polling is no longer reliable. Do you think it is?
I think that polling, when you're in a stable political regime, can get almost perfectly reliable. When the regime is in flux, it becomes less reliable. Now our party regime is in flux. Mm-hmm. Republicans don't get elected by appealing to the same things that they did 10 years ago. But, a midterm and a general election from now, say 4 years from now, we might have a pretty good picture of what a Trump voter is, and we might be able to pick, to predict, say, the 2022 congressional election with all the precision that, say, Nate Silver did, the 2012 presidential election. So, and another thing, the polling was not as far off as people like to say. The pollsters totally missed the winner. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote by about 1%. Right? There were some pollsters who were close to that.
Right.
And the Dornsife poll, the USC Dornsife poll did have Trump.
LA Times.
Yeah, winning.
Yeah. And they did, and they were consistent. I think they tracked that every day.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question on the economy for you. For a Trump administration, he's talking about a couple of things that I think a lot of conservatives are having a hard time circling, and I'm wondering whether you could address this. He's focusing on jobs programs, okay, getting people back to work, and tax cuts.
Yeah.
Infrastructure, which is the jobs programs, putting people to work, roads, bridges, streets, whatever it may be, and tax cuts. Yeah. How does, as a conservative, do you circle that?
You mean, how do I reconcile those two things?
I mean,
well, they're not really reconcilable. If by conservative you mean someone who believes in a balanced budget. That's right. Well, in the old days, pre-Ronald Reagan, a conservative was someone who believed in a balanced budget. That was a conservative principle. In the Reagan era, the definition of a conservative economic policy began to change, and conservatism became associated with sort of like business-friendly, supply-side tax cutting. You know what I mean? I think maybe conservative is the wrong word for that. So first of all, you have to define what you mean by conservative. If you're talking about budget balancing, then there is obviously an inconsistency in this Trump program over the long term. Okay? So let's say over the short term, you can have a jobs program, that's going to involve spending money, and you can have a tax cut. But it's highly stimulative, and it's highly inflationary. Now, there are certain circumstances in which an inflationary policy is called for. I don't know if we're in one right now. But over the long term, I don't think it's sustainable.
Do you see CPI and inflation causing an effect that the decisions with the GOP House and Senate will have to make that are going to be uncomfortable for many Americans? I'm talking about budget cuts, balanced budget amendment. I don't know if that's ever going to be put forth by this House and Senate as it was in 1994, 1995.
I rather doubt it, but, inflation has been very hard for people to predict over the last decade, including by really superb, macroeconomists, of which I am not one, okay?
Right.
But a lot of people thought, when you had in the first days of the Obama stimulus, when you had, basically a $900 billion stimulus program, you had a federal government that was running trillion-dollar deficits for several years in a row, to the point where actually 2 out of every $5 that the government spent were borrowed. When you had that, you had people saying, how could this not result in inflation? Yet it didn't result in inflation. So I'm not going to make any predictions, for or against inflation. But you can say that certain things are inflationary, right? I mean, if you spend more than you take in, that's the definition of inflationary, I think.
Okay. Another issue, you refer to President Obama as the Prince of the Democratic Party, and you've in fact suggested that he may be a kingmaker in 2020 for whoever the next candidate, which nobody can predict who that is right now. Why is that?
Well, I said he was a prince of the Democratic Party, by which I meant that he commands a certain electorate. Hillary Clinton lost because she couldn't bring out the entirety of the Barack Obama electorate. It wasn't the party's electorate. It was Barack Obama's. Now, it's kind of interesting that, you would think that our first black president would have had an advantage in black urban voters. He didn't really. Hillary Clinton did fine bringing out those voters. It was other voters, young people, old ex-blue collar people, a lot of the people who voted for Trump, actually, surprisingly. Obama got those people, Hillary didn't. So going into 2020, people will be knocking on his door saying, okay, we want to know how to get back those voters that you got in 2012, but that we didn't get in 2016. That will give him a position of considerable power in the party, I think.
Okay. Last question for you. And I'd like to go from a more to a global, especially when it pertains to Europe right now. We're seeing a seismic shift. Obviously, we had Brexit over the summer. Italy this week just had a major earthquake. Prime Minister's coming out, and he's going to be, after the constitutional amendment failed, he's going to be quitting. Do you have a wave of populism that isn't just related to Trump in America, that is now global? And what is that due to, if it's not necessarily, it's against globalism, I should say, a wave against globalism, against elitism, and so on?
Yeah.
What is this?
I think there are a couple of things. I think there was a period when, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when, free markets and linking the world through business seemed very attractive. And there still is a great deal that's attractive about it. However, it had certain highly negative effects on the income distribution in prosperous Western countries. It seems to have made the rich richer and the poor poorer. And it's reached a point where there is a rebellion against that in all of these countries. There is also the belief that the political system is implicated in that economic system of global trade, and in the economic consequences of it. And the failure of politicians to see see these problems coming, and then to act to correct them when they did come, I think has delegitimized them to a large degree. And so you have a growing number of voters who just don't believe politicians.
Do you think this leads to a breakup of the EU?
Well, I think that it already has. I mean, that's what Brexit is. Brexit
Right.
is a partial breakup of the EU. I mean, whether this is going to lead to the absolute collapse of the EU is a different question. But I think that a lot of these countries are coming under real populist pressure to at least, if not drop out of the EU, at least carve out larger spaces of autonomy within it. And a good example is what is the way Hungary and Poland, both of them, in their very different ways, have gone back on the EU agreement to accept a certain quota of refugees from Germany, which had been voted last summer. They've said, no, our people don't want it, and we won't do it.
Right, right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Chris Caldwell, at the Weekly Standard. I understand you are currently finishing up a book as well, and we're looking forward to seeing that. I believe it's about the baby boomer generation.
It's about that generation and about the the rise and fall of the 1960s political system.
That's going to be fascinating. Look forward to seeing it, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Great,
so much, Chris.
Thank you. All right.